We were stationed at F.E. Warren, which is a nuclear weapon-oriented base to say the least. The weapons are always stored off in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but flat dirt roads and cornfields for as far as the eye can see. You could watch your dog run away for 2 days. Fast forward to my fire team talking up this haunted school less than a mile down the road. I get amped up and persuade the FSC to let us go off-site to go to the school. He lets us go since he felt it was necessary to see the place, so we prepare the trip by ensuring all our NVGs, thermals, and our flashlights were highly operational because someone said ghosts drain batteries. We hop in the truck and make our way. The first thing we notice upon approaching this old decrepit school was that something from the deep dark was absolutely screeching at us, so loudly that it almost didn't seem real. Turns out, it was an owl in a pipe that was projecting his screech. My fire team partner Salvador points out that the owls are a bad omen in his religion. Crap. The only entrance point is the front door that's been busted wide open from all the storms. We enter into the main hallway. Long, dark, dank, but definitely not alone. Immediately in front of us is the auditorium, which had a bloody owl shredded to bits in the direct center. The 4 of us are huddled together when my fire team leader, Curtis, sees something run out from the auditorium that we are standing in and ran down the hallway. Like a shadow is what I remember him saying. We walk down to the end of that terrifying hallway and come to the entrance to the notorious basement. Walking through, I continually look over my shoulder because something kept touching my neck softly. My spine is shivering cold, my entire body hot as fire. It made no sense at all. Blood is scribbled poorly on the walls, spelling out the phrase, "Get out." Okay then. I try to act like it isn't terrifying and tell the boys to head up. We get back up to the top, and lo and behold, there is a giant opened maintenance shaft in the wall right at the entrance to the basement that wasn't open. We walk back to the entry of the hallway and attempt to turn on the devices we had. NVGs were at low battery. What? This is where it gets weird. We're in a line formation, basically 4 dudes crapping their pants in a row, staring off into the dark, horrifying, long hallway. We get the thermals up, and basically, we make out these 2 tiny, tiny glowing balls that are basically at the end of the hallway, just intertwining with one another. We pass the thermals back and forth, debating whether it's a spirit or dust picking up low light, and we conclude that it was not dust, as we could clearly see dust around these glowing balls. The glowing balls stop moving and stand still all of a sudden. The thermals die, the NVGs die, and from the deepest part of the hallway, a ceramic plate flies straight at us and shatters loudly at our feet. We panic, and in the confusion, we separate. I bolt straight for what's left of the door, tearing it off the wall, and one of the other 2 guys, Salvador, went to the auditorium. Bad idea. He doesn't come out for a solid 2 minutes of terror. We all link up and absolutely sprint back to our driver, who was patiently waiting in the truck, and tell him to floor it. We're hyperventilating and can't process the feeling of terror we just encountered. We approach the gate to Golf 1, and the radio starts acting up, changing dial to a static station, and then cranking itself to the max. Now, I feel that I'm a calm person and a rational human being, but I falcon punched that radio so hard it broke. We get into the station and tell the FSC what went down. He notices that our gunner, Salvador, is acting weird and quiet. We calm down and try to settle for the rest of our long 14-hour shifts until the morning. After an hour, we notice that Salvador's strangeness is now concerning. He was staring at a blank wall for more than an hour, muttering. We went to the FSC desk and brought the concerns to him. I tell him that I'm not a religious man, but I think we desperately need to pray for him now, and that I think he's going to harm himself. Salvador is a great happy dude. We know it was the spirit. We walk out past 2 secured doors, 2 separate rooms, to see Salvador slowly turning his head from the blank wall, smile, and say, "I don't want you to pray for me, and I'm not going to harm myself." I pooped my pants right there. This was not my friend, and it was not humanely possible to have heard our conversation. We get an alarm activation at one of our sites, always a rabbit or something, and I'm seriously worried. It's a long drive to the site, so I'm just drilling him with questions about what's going on, mostly met with hostility. While on site, I conduct the exterior walk-around, and this is where Salvador, who's been watching us off-site at the HMVV with the thermals, yells at me to stop walking. That's when he tells me that there was a red figure following over me. Just a heads up, thermals don't pick up anything other than black and white. The alarm gets cleared, and we head back. Salvador snaps back into his muttering again. This continues until I get so uncomfortable that I pull the Humvee over and get out to talk. As soon as we get face to face and I put my hand on him, he has no recollection of any of the crazy stuff that he's been spewing off. Shakes it off for the rest of the night, and we press. I finish the shift and rack out, and I'm woken up by Salvador complaining about someone going in his room and trashing it, and then beating the crap out of his back. Sure enough, his room is trashed, with the 3 other mattresses all over, and stuff is just wrecked. Lift his shirt up, and yep, the guy's got some serious markings on his back. We were just nuke cops, but we could tell that these were not self-inflicted. I told my flight chief the story that day, and told him that if he ever tried to set me up for a trip out at Gulf 1, that I would be going AWOL. By the way, Salvador is still a good dude, and not possessed anymore. The guy had his grandma rub an egg on his body, and I'm pretty sure we're all good now. My auntie bought a lovely home in Pennsylvania, but was built on a battlefield of the Revolutionary War. My cousin told me that a tall man walks around the house, and he wears these heavy boots. He said the man was harmless, but you'll hear him throughout the night. I laughed it off because my cousin is a jokester. But man, when I heard those heavy footsteps in the early morning hours, I asked, "Is that him?" He said yeah. The next morning, everyone was making breakfast. My cousin had a pretty decent-sized family, so while everyone is setting the table, the back sliding door slid open, and a few moments later, the front door swings open, as if the tall man came from the backyard and left out the front door. What shook me was how casual everyone was about it. They just looked at me and said, he does that sometimes. That night, we went out, and when we got back, my uncle realized that he forgot the house key. We stood out in the yard, and after checking the door a few times, it just unlocked. We walk in, and the living room lights just come on. No one was home. It was as if the spirit knew we were stuck outside and welcomed us back in. This was in late spring, so it was rather warm. But certain parts of the house were just insanely cold at times. I actually got sick because of this. The last thing that happened was when my cousin asked me to get something from the garage. As I pulled the door open, something suddenly snatched it back in a slam. I figured maybe it was a gust of wind. I opened the door again, and something on the other side was pulling it back, and it was strong. There was no one in the garage, and it was well lit. I don't think he wanted me in there. After about 15 seconds of tug of war with the tall man in the door, he finally let up. The tension was so strong that when he let go, I kind of stumbled backwards and almost fell into the wall. It was by far the weirdest thing that's happened to me. I didn't go back to that house. When I went back home after those few days, I was never the same. It's safe to say that there was definitely a paranormal presence in that house. I've had lots of encounters over the years. Here is what I remember from where I lived for my first 20 years, a house built in the 1950s. Everyone heard footsteps throughout the night. I was about 8, and I couldn't sleep one night because I could hear things. So I went to climb in my parents' bed. My mum was at an AGM, so it was only Dad, my younger sister, and me at home. The next day, my dad told my mum about seeing a white female figure standing in the bedroom doorway, between my mum's and my height. I was tall for my age, so the figure was between 5 foot and 5'6". One Easter, I woke up in the early hours and couldn't fall back to sleep. Then, I heard movement in my room and felt a hand on my forehead, as if feeling my temperature. I was given a cutlery set from my great-grandmother, and it sat on my windowsill. One morning, I was laying in bed just after I woke up, and just the knives started moving. Our back door opened one time, and we all saw it happen, so joked it was my uncle, who had passed the year before. I often felt someone put a hand on my shoulder, with no one around me. My mum's dog, which she got when I was 2, would sleep in my room as she got older. I had laid one of my baby blankets out for her. Once she had been put to sleep, her night routine continued. I would hear her walk in, turn on the blanket, and lay down, and then hear her breathing. And when my budgie passed, I would feel and hear him fly around my room. My cat passed from a snake bite not long after we moved, and I would hear her walk around my room. Then I moved in with my now husband. I had many stories about the house and how things would turn off and on, among other things. An elderly couple passed naturally here. I had many nights in this house where I had an off feeling. There were 2 main events that happened whilst I lived here. I was standing in the kitchen talking to my husband, who was in the bathroom looking through the toilet and laundry doorways at me, when the kitchen cabinet behind me opened and a soup can flew a meter across the room. The other time, we were all sound asleep. My now husband, 4-year-old stepson, and myself, when my husband and I heard my stepson scream in terror. We ran into his room and tried to calm him. He kept pointing at the corner and saying, "The man," but we saw nothing. After about half an hour, he was calm enough to explain what happened. There had been a dark man at the foot of his bed, grabbing his feet. That night, doors kept opening and closing on their own. Then we purchased our house, a deceased estate, where the man had been a recluse and was not found for around a month during an Australian summer, so the room where he died was not in a good way. We had since found out that someone else had passed naturally in the house too, which made sense from what we saw. My husband is an intuitive empath that has always seen the paranormal, but is still somehow skeptical. He shoots up in bed, still asleep when he senses something, and sleepwalks to doorways, as if staring at something standing there. One night, my stepson, 8 at the time, screamed because there was a very large black dog in his room. It was taller than our medium-sized dogs. This was one of the nights my husband shot up in his sleep and went to run into my stepson's room before anything happened. I had never actually seen anything or anyone, only felt, heard, and seen things move until I was pregnant with my son, apparently the norm in my husband's family, when I saw someone standing in the archway between our bedroom and sunroom. I thought it was my husband until I reached out and felt him beside me. I looked, blinked, still there, turned my head, and they mirrored me. Then they were gone. I told my husband and mother-in-law, and they suggested it could be her dad, who died when she was 20. So they showed me a photo, and it had been him. I have also seen shadow people a couple of times. We believe them to be previous owners, as they don't feel bad. My husband has seen a hat man who gave off bad energy. I woke him saying he's not welcome and has to leave. I've heard a woman's voice crying for help, as if she were drowning. We have a dam and a creek that runs behind our property, but no one was around, and the voice was too close to me. My husband and I have both seen a woman standing at our dam, then walk away, disappearing. By the way, the dam has dried up and there was no one in it. My cat has been in my stepson's room, even though no one had opened the door, since he was at his mum's. Another time, I went to walk into the bathroom, but the door had been locked. Also, my phone and speaker keep disconnecting whilst I listen to ghost story podcasts. There's a lot here, and this is what has happened just to me or when I've been around. There's most likely more I can't remember. My husband has had a lot more extremely intense experiences. The paranormal used to freak me out until I was pregnant, which I think is because my son has inherited my husband's family ability. I'm skeptical. The paranormal is not something I study or discuss outside of entertainment. However, something happened in 2009. It was a bizarre, physical manifestation that I never found a reasonable explanation for. I live in the countryside of Brazil, and I had some friends in a small neighboring town, which was 20 minutes away from my house by the highway. The small town was quiet, modest, with a population of about 15,000. I was 18 at the time, my best friend Alex, 20. It was common for me to take the car to go visit him, spending weekends there and getting closer to his friends. We soon became a united group. Our nights were all about sitting in the central square, drinking and playing cards. But we were young and explorers, so from time to time, we went to more remote locations in the outskirts of the small town, and they all had their stories, but the strangest place was the bridge. The bridge was on a dirt road, with no lights, surrounded by farms. The bridge was about 20 meters long, over a creek. It was about 10 meters, or 32 feet, high above the creek, and was surrounded by native forest. Overall, the bridge was peaceful and quiet. We only heard a few nocturnal birds and the sound of the water, but the place was warm, strangely warm. If it was winter, it was more noticeable, and the thermal sensation made us take off our sweaters when we reached the bridge. There were many urban legends among the young people about the bridge and its road. From the group of friends, at least 2 couples said that they had tried to stop the car on the bridge to have some intimacy, and were interrupted by shadows, loud conversations, laughter, and other inexplicable events. 2 factors contributed to the promotion of these legends. 2 places near the bridge, an abandoned slaughterhouse, and a crossroads. The crossroads were an offering place for an African-based religion. It was located after the bridge, a few kilometers away. Metals reflecting the car's headlights could be seen in the distance. These metals were gallons of paint with animal blood, a kind of common ritual. The slaughterhouse was located before reaching the bridge. It was an abandoned and open place, so we went there a few times to explore. In the slaughter tanks, there was still bloodstains encrusted on the tiles. We always visited these places at night, in a group of 10 people or so. It was fun, and we laughed a lot at the legends, and always stopped at the bridge to talk. The roads might not be very friendly, but the bridge was a peaceful and quiet place. We sat on the edge of the bridge with our feet suspended and talked about life and plans, while the moon and the open sky brightened our faces. I have great memories of that time. Anyway, I have some strange stories about the place, but one in particular gives me chills whenever I tell it. When I turned 19, I was accepted into a university. I was moving out of state and was in a farewell mood. Alex and I were close and talked a lot about the future. It was a Wednesday, and he called me to ask me if I wanted to go visit him. I took the highway and soon arrived in the small town. I picked Alex up from his house, and we decided not to go to the central square because we would end up meeting more people, and we wanted to be alone. So we decided to go to the bridge and have some privacy. So far, so good. We stopped the car, walked to the middle of the bridge, sat with our legs hanging over the creek, and talked. It was a very clear night. The warmth of the bridge was cozy, and we were easily distracted by our thoughts, until we heard a noise in the surrounding forest. It sounded as if an animal had tripped and rolled a few meters into the creek, but without splashing into the water. We looked around, saw nothing, and soon forgot about it. While Alex was talking about his relationship with his girlfriend, I began to notice a figure in the middle of the creek. At first, I thought it was the moonlight reflecting off the water, because it was white, but it was more defined, human-shaped, and it was waving its hand at me. I interrupted Alex and asked, "Dude, I don't know if it's in my head, but do you see that thing in the middle of the water?" He replied, "I thought it was just me. Let's get out of here." We quickly ran to the car and sped off into the small town. The car had some dew on it, and as the dirt from the road started to collect on the glass, we saw a handprint in the middle of the windshield. As we were used to some strange things on the bridge, despite the shock, the situation did not shake us up much, so we decided to stop in the square to talk about what had happened. I parked the car and we sat down almost next to it. Suddenly, the car's blinker turned on by itself. I looked at the car and couldn't see anything inside. The windows were completely fogged up. From the alarm control, I unlocked, locked, and tried various combinations to turn off the blinker. After all, I might have accidentally activated it in my pocket, but nothing worked. I decided to go to the car and then noticed that the blinker button was pressed. The interior was warm, as if someone was breathing. The windows were completely fogged up and the blinker button was down. Alex and I stared at this situation for a few seconds when he offered to let me sleep in his house. I didn't have the courage to drive alone. The next morning, I went back to my house. I had a lot to do, and because of that, I forgot all about the event. On Friday of the same week, I was alone in the study, playing something on the computer. It was around 7 p.m. when I heard the front door opening and closing, and my mother announcing that she had arrived. I shouted, "Okay, I need to talk to you," and went to meet her. But when I got to the living room, the lights were off. I went to her bedroom, and nothing either. I thought it was my imagination, and went back to the game. I heard my mother again, and this time it was her. We talked and she left for the gym. I went back to the computer, and after some time, I decided to go to the kitchen to get something to eat. When I got there and turned on the light, there was a tall, slender, seemingly floating woman standing in the middle of the kitchen, staring at me. I couldn't see her face very well. My vision was blurred with fear. Her hair was black and long, spread on the floor. Her skin was extremely pale, and she appeared to be in a white dress. Not sure, because the hair and the dress seemed to blend together. Anyway, stunned, I walked backwards and leaned against the wall. When I looked again, she was there, but floating out of my field of view. I never saw her again. I come to the end of this story feeling an intense chill running through my body. I love horror movies and entertainment that scare me, but this happened to me, so the feeling is different. Since 2009, I haven't been able to explain what happened. I only know that I don't want to see it again, but every time I tell this story, it feels like I might get an unwanted visitor. Whilst I've always been skeptical and evidence-based, I've never been able to shake this experience. My mother and her sisters all had what may be termed as paranormal experiences, but without my personal experience until this point, I only thought of them as intriguing stories. As I take after my mother though, I'm male. It's possible that they have a perception which I share, which may be relevant later. In the mid-1990s, when I was about 21, I moved into the top floor flat of a 3-story building in Birmingham, in the UK. Mine had its own small landing and separate bedroom and lounge/kitchen. I also had 2 kittens who played their part in this. Having previously shared a house with friends, and being young, this was my first time by myself, which may explain the feeling, but it felt a very tranquil place, with the exception of my current house, the most peaceful place I've ever lived. Again, this may be relevant later. Nothing of any real relevance happened for the majority of the time I lived there, but I would often listen to music for hours with my eyes closed, absorbing every note, frequently Nick Drake, whom I had recently discovered, and feel as though someone was sat listening with me. I didn't pay too much attention to this with my very scientific background, but the sensation was as if someone was sat next to you now and you closed your eyes. You would know or sense that they were there. Hard to explain, but it somehow felt nice and I got used to it, putting it down to my own imagination though. Fairly often, the two kittens would be playing in the lounge and both suddenly stop and stare at the same spot on the wall, then follow something around the room together. Again, I thought nothing of it for a while, but then realized that there was never an insect or reflection that they would be looking at. Eventually, with the frequency of this, combined with the feeling of a presence, whenever I saw them do this, I would tell them to stop watching the ghost, although, of course I was saying this very much tongue-in-cheek. Another curiosity with them was that they would refuse to enter the bedroom, or quickly leave if carried in there. Something else I didn't pay much attention to until later. I had lived there for about 1.5 years, and decided I would save some money and share a house with someone I knew. When I told the landlord, he commented that of all of his properties, this one was very much an outlier, in that no one, apart from me, had stayed there more than a few weeks or a couple of months. I had been there for 18 to 24 months. So, a few weeks before moving out, the first noticeable thing happened. At the foot of my bed is an outside wall with a small window to the left. As I lay down in bed one evening, the only light was moonlight and a distant street light. I closed my eyes and realized, although dark, I could still see the room around me. I thought my eyes must be open, but I scrunched them shut to be sure. Sounds odd, I know, but I could still see, and was definitely not asleep. I was both marveling at and trying to understand whatever craziness this was, when I had what I could only describe as an out-of-body experience. I began floating up to the ceiling, stopped at a few feet away, then floating towards the foot of the bed and outside wall. Admittedly, I was now in a panic, as I didn't know what was happening, but the overriding fear was floating through the wall and not returning. I do feel conflicting thoughts saying this. So I tried to shake myself back down somehow. I then had that falling sensation you get in dreams, and the jolt when you wake up. So despite feeling I was awake the whole time, I put it down to having fallen asleep immediately and going straight into a dream. A week later, and my final week at the flat, I went to bed one night, closed my eyes, and again could see the room around me. As I looked around again with my eyes closed, I was first excited at being able to repeat this, but then remembered the out-of-body experience. That worried me, so I opened my eyes so it wouldn't happen again, but also to know that I was awake. As I looked across to the diagonally opposite corner of the room where the window was, I looked slightly left at the standalone wardrobe and saw the image of a young woman standing there, about 12 feet away, looking at me. Her image was formed by misty white and dark shadow, and I saw she had long, straight, shiny hair as a standout feature. This was way before the Ring movies, even the originals. I can imagine what some may think. Of course, it scared the crap out of me. I put it down to tired eyes and the moonlight making the shape, But then she slowly made her way to my bed and, as best I could make out, leaned over as if to kiss me goodnight. With all my bravery and rational thinking, I pulled the covers over my head, scared out of my mind, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did, and I don't know how long I lay there waiting, but I eventually went to sleep. I thought that was it, and the next day put it down to an overactive imagination, despite what I shared above. I later moved out without telling anyone any of this for fear of being labelled a crazy person. A few weeks later, I'm with my dad in his car one evening and we drive past the house. We both look at it and notice the lounge light is on in the top floor window. He says it looks like someone has moved in already, to which I replied, thinking he'd laugh at me for being silly, "Yeah, either that or it's a ghost." To my surprise, he looks at me with a stern face and asks me if I'm being serious. He's usually very much a life and soul type person. This worries me. He pulls the car over and says that it's really important and he's deadly serious to let him know if there's anything I should tell him. So I start relaying to him all the things that have happened, and he's obviously concerned. He asks me to describe her, and once I have, he replies, "Yep, that's her." I think I was more shocked at that moment than the night I saw her. He then tells me, "When I had said where you had moved to, your nan wanted you to move out right away, but we didn't say anything to you as we didn't want to worry you. Your nan's next door neighbour had a daughter, and she was murdered in that flat by someone she worked with one New Year's Eve." My nan's neighbours were roughly the same age, so this would have been in the late 60s or early 70s. You just described her exactly, and the police said when they found her, she had not long had a bath and had been strangled with her dressing gown belt. One thing they remarked upon was how long and shiny her hair was. Still gives me chills, but this isn't the end of it. At this point, I still hadn't told anyone apart from close family about my experience. I was trying to avoid the loony label. I was in my early 40s and working at a company as a software tester. As I say, my mindset is technical and facts-oriented. A guy starts in my team, 10 years my senior, but we have the same interests and personality, and we get on great. We're still friends. A horror movie had just come out, so we're talking about it, which leads to talk of other similar movies. And then he tells me about a scary experience he once had himself. That he was lying in bed one night and suddenly had the sensation of being strangled. He said it was so vivid he swore it was real, but opened his eyes and no one else was there. He lived by himself in a flat. I asked him where this was. Same area. I asked him the road. Same road. House number, flat. Same one. He had lived there about 10 years previous to my stay there. That was the first time I told someone else about my experience. If this was paranormal, did she show herself to me because of the links between our families? Is this why the flat was so peaceful for me and not previous tenants, if that was why they moved? Could I see her because of some ability, however small, which runs in my family? Is this what the kittens could sense? Despite that experience, I'm still skeptical. So many questions I can't wrap my head around. Like, how would a spirit have conscious thought or action? How do clothes become part of an apparition? Why do we have little, if any, hard evidence? At the same time, I have no other explanation for what happened, other than that was a lot of weird coincidences. When I was 13, my family moved into a home in a nice neighborhood in Tucson, Arizona. It was a relatively new build, 2002, and was part of a very nice subdivision. I lived in the house from age 13 to roughly 19. There was a year in the college dorms in the middle. No one had died in the house that I could find, and overall, it didn't have any of those haunted house red flags. Also, for context, although I am currently not very religious, I grew up in an extremely Christian religious family. The entire time I lived in the house, I had horrible nightmares, to the point where I was scared to go to sleep. My parents would sort of play it off like it was nothing. My parents were on one side of the house and had their own bathroom. On my side of the house, it was just me, and no one else used the bathroom. At night, I would hear the sink was on and the toilet flushing. No one was ever in the bathroom when I looked. I tried to play it off. I would also hear scratching in the attic relatively frequently. My childhood house had a stray cat that lived in our attic, so I quickly explained that away as likely some sort of animal, even though this was a newer house with a sealed attic, and we never found an animal. I thought all of this was just happening to me. Eventually, my mum and dad started talking about the footsteps they heard at night. My mum said they would walk around the house, but she didn't feel any negative energy. So she thought maybe it was an angel or a deceased loved one protecting us. Insert eye roll at angel comment here. My dad said the footsteps happened every night. I stayed awake one night, and sure as hell, it sounded like someone shuffling through the house. All of this seemed like pretty harmless activity until one night in my late teens. I woke up to find my bedroom door closed. I had a mirror on the back of my bedroom door, and I was always afraid of seeing something in the mirror, so I kept the door open and the hall light on. Everyone in the house knew about my obsession with keeping the door open. Later, when I asked about it, no one in my family said they shut the door. Upon seeing the door shut, I immediately panicked. I got out of bed, heart pounding, and tried to not look in the mirror. I opened the door, took a deep breath, and walked back to my bed. I remember thinking something like, "This is the part of the horror movie where I get attacked," and then I laid down in my bed. This next part, I'm not kidding. I know without a shadow of doubt that this happened to me, and I can't explain it to save my life. The second I laid down in bed, it was like the covers were pulled up over my face and someone was holding them down over my head. It felt like hands were all over my body, pinning me down. I felt like I was burning all over, and I could hear the sound of like firewood burning in my ears. I could also hear laughing. I couldn't move, and I felt like I was going to die. Regardless of your views on religion, all I could think to do was pray. I don't know if I prayed out loud or really loud in my head, but I said something like, "In the name of Jesus, stop," 3 times. I remember very specifically on the 3rd time, everything evaporated. My house was quiet, and I ran. I bolted into my parents' room, covered in sweat and sobbing. My dad said it was just a nightmare. I got angry and yelled at him for not listening to me. I wouldn't go back into my room. My mum took it a little more seriously. The next day, She had the house anointed and prayed over, and everything stopped. The footsteps, the nightmares, the toilet flushing, everything. We eventually moved out of the house, and nothing like that ever happened again. But it seems that everywhere I go since then, weird stuff still happens to me periodically, but not on that scale. Like I said, I'm not super religious anymore, but this is one of those things I can't really explain. I know it happened. My family knows it happened. I can't offer any logical explanation for it. Everything I'm about to describe took place from June of 2019 through June of 2020. I was 19 years old when it all started. I had been dating my now ex-boyfriend for nearly 5 years at the time. Naturally, we felt that it was finally time to leave the comfort of our parents' homes and move out on our own together. We decided on a studio apartment in the historic district of our hometown, as it was the cheapest we could find, and we somehow got approved, despite the fact that we made well below the required wage for this place. It was incredibly small, only around 500 square feet. We weren't in an apartment complex, but on the back end of a very large house that was converted into a duplex. The house itself was built sometime in the 1930s and was rather crappy. Our front door opened up to a tiny sunroom that sat between an even tinier kitchen and our living room/bedroom. The doorways between each room didn't have actual doors attached, so we hung curtains in the doorways to separate them. We had no central air, no oven, and the floors were uneven, but it was home. Honestly, the location was why I fell in love with it. We were a 5-minute walk from all the mum and pop shops, farmers market, ice skating rink, etc., in the cutest little town you've ever seen. Best of all, it was ours. Things started to get weird the first few weeks that we moved in. We had an upstairs neighbor in the duplex, whom I'll call Kay. She was super friendly, and we made introductions right away. The first time we spoke, she immediately informed me that our house was haunted. Me being me, I was intrigued and a bit excited. I'm going to give you all a breakdown of everything she told me that day, because it's relevant to nearly everything I experienced while living there. She began by telling me that our section of the house in particular was the source of the paranormal activity. She had been living in this house for 3+ years before my boyfriend and I moved in, and a few months before we showed up, our section of the house had been newly renovated for the first time. We all know how that usually goes. The sunroom, as I knew it, had nice wood floors, but previously they were concrete. There was a hatch that opened into a dirt floor crawl space underneath the house, with a staircase that was broken halfway down and didn't reach the bottom. Due to the broken staircase, anybody who decided to venture down would need to bring a ladder. Otherwise, they would not be able to get back up. This is where it starts to get creepy. On one of the walls down there, painted in red substance, were the words, "Good girl," and a few red handprints to match. Kay actually showed me a photo of this to back up the authenticity of what she was telling me. This immediately gave me very uncomfortable kidnap and torture vibes. Who knows what somebody could have been up to down there back in the early 1900s. I am solidly convinced that something horrible happened down there, and that it was the origin of whatever presence occupies the house. During the renovation, the hatch was completely sealed off and covered by new flooring. This was when, according to Kay, things started to get weird. she started noticing cabinets in the kitchen opening and closing on their own, mysterious footsteps, seeing things move across her room in the corner of her eye, etc. Just big nopes all around. I quickly stopped being excited and instead became a little nervous. This was my new home after all. Things started happening almost immediately and grew worse over time. My boyfriend was a skeptic and did not take anything seriously, but I certainly did. Almost every night between 1 and 3 a.m., I would hear light knocking on our front door in the sunroom. One knock at a time, very slow. It would continue until somebody got up to check the door, and the moment that I would walk through the doorway into the sunroom, it would abruptly stop. Our trash can was also in the sunroom. Periodically, each day and night, I would hear the unmistakable sound of the lid opening and the trash bag rustling, as if something were being thrown away. Often when I was in the kitchen, I would see movement in the sunroom from my peripheral vision. I swear, it always looked like a person standing in front of the trash can. Nothing was ever there when I turned to fully look. I always felt like I was being watched. Always. 5 months into our lease, I ended things with my boyfriend. I can't explain it, but being there changed me. I began acting differently, feeling differently, thinking differently. We decided it would be best for him to move back in with his parents, and for me to remain in the apartment by myself. That's when things started to get worse. Shortly after the breakup, I grew afraid of sleeping alone. Whenever possible, I would have friends stay the night with me for the benefit of some company. I would never tell my friends about what I was experiencing or why I wanted them to stay. One particular weekend, an old friend of mine from out of state that I had just reconnected with was visiting my city. I suggested that he just stay with me rather than pay for a hotel room while he was in town. We go way back and weren't opposed to sharing a bed, so he quickly accepted my offer. The first night he spent in my apartment, my now boyfriend, let's call him T, who was only a friend at the time, came over as well, and the three of us stayed up getting drunk, playing cards and chatting. While we were having a good time in the living room, we all suddenly heard something get thrown into the trash can. I was used to hearing this every day, but now 2 of my friends had heard it as well. That was a first. We all paused for a moment, exchanged the obligatory "Did you guys hear that?" and continued our game of cards. We all ended up passing out drunk and experienced nothing else that night. The second day, I went to work, and B left to spend some time with some other friends until I got home. We met back at my apartment around 7 p.m, where we spent the rest of the night playing video games and smoking. Everything was going smoothly until around 1 a.m. We both were laying in my bed, reminiscing on old times for a while, when I noticed the time. I decided to warn him about the knocking that would most likely ensue in the near future. He didn't take me very seriously, and I soon turned off the light as we were ready to sleep. Around 15 minutes later, we both jumped when we heard it. B let out a very loud, "Oh hell no." I thought his reaction was hilarious, so I decided to mess with him. I told him that according to a rumor, if a spirit knocks on your door, you should never open it. If you do, you'll let it in, and it will stay with you forever. I proceeded to leap out of bed, walk to the front door, and turn the knob. He followed me to the door and was frantically begging me not to open it. I laughed and sarcastically replied, "Of course I'm not going to actually open it." We both had a good laugh, but I could tell he was a bit freaked out. The next morning, he told me something that sent chills down my spine. Well, a few weeks before B came to visit, I experienced sleep paralysis for the first time in my life. I fell asleep on my couch and woke up unable to move. I saw a black shadow fly out of my closet, hover over the top of me, and it felt as if it was holding me down, attacking me. Typical sleep paralysis stuff. It scared me so badly that I left my apartment and didn't return until the next day. B experienced the exact same thing that second night, even down to the black shadow emerging from the very same closet. I was uneasy when he told me because I had never told him about my experience weeks prior, and it was his first sleep paralysis episode as well. It was most likely an unsettling coincidence, but it's relevant though, because it scared the hell out of me. I started genuinely attempting to get rid of the ghost, or whatever it was, because my fear had reached a new level. Kay gifted me some sage after a conversation about it, and I would burn it every day in an attempt to cleanse my home. I would also often smoke, and, as dorky as it sounds, try to make friends with the spirit in my apartment. It became somewhat of a ritual for me. Smoke, walk around my place with sage, speak out loud and say things such as, "Okay, spirit, ghost, whatever you are, could you maybe leave me alone? Or coexist without the spooky stuff? Can we just be chill, please? I'm a 20-year-old girl. My name is Jay. I'm by myself and you really freak me out. It's not cool. Let's just be cool. We're cucumbers, bro. I swear I'll leave as soon as my lease is up, but I'm stuck here. I'm sorry that I'm in your space. Please stop scaring me. Thanks, bud." Of course, to nobody's surprise, my goofy and informal pleas for a truce with this spirit got me nowhere. In fact, things seemed to escalate from there. I was terrified. I literally tried to tune out all of the freaky stuff by overloading my senses 24/7, blasting my television, wearing headphones, staring at my phone, playing video games. Nothing worked. I would always notice the paranormal activity, no matter how hard I tried to tune it out. It was too much. One night, things took a turn. It may not sound significantly terrifying, but it is the creepiest thing that has happened to me in my life so far. T and I had just made the switch from being friends to partners, and COVID had just made its appearance, so we decided to quarantine together. He moved in with me, and I was ecstatic. I finally would never have to sleep alone again. I could finally sleep in peace. Or so I thought. We were in bed early that night, fast asleep by 10 p.m. A few hours passed, and I woke up in the middle of the night to the feeling of movement. I noticed that my blanket was slowly being pulled off my body. At first, I assumed it was T stealing the covers or shifting in a way that was causing the blanket to move, until I glanced over at him and saw that he was dead asleep and unmoving. On top of that, I realized the blanket was being pulled from the opposite side of me from where he was laying. Cue instant panic. I immediately grabbed the blanket and made a desperate attempt to yank it back up, but this was met by resistance from the other end. It was as if someone was firmly holding it and fighting my attempts to pull it back up and over my body. At this point, I screamed and practically jumped on top of T. He woke up, still half asleep, and asked me what was wrong. I didn't want to scare him, so I told him it was nothing. He rolled over to go back to sleep, and I laid there, utterly frozen with fear, for nearly an hour before I was able to drift back to sleep somehow. I stopped trying to rid myself of the spirit, and I never experienced anything like that again. The next few months were entirely occupied by the standard, more mundane happenings. The knocking, trash can, feeling of being watched, seeing things, etc. I became accustomed to it all, and I have to admit, I was sad to leave when my lease expired. I know that there are many people out there who have seen things that would put my story to shame. Full apparitions, hearing voices, etc. All in all, the haunting that took place in my apartment could have been much worse. I look back now at my time spent there, and I miss it. It was very much an adventure. My life changed, and I changed as a person. More during my year in that apartment than at any other point in my life. Perhaps whatever was with me in that place helped facilitate those changes. I sometimes wonder why I did certain things that I did while living under that roof. Things that I never would have done in the past. Things that were entirely out of character for me. I've heard that hauntings can make people act differently. In the end, I'll never know. All I know for sure is that I will never forget that place.